So what year did you graduate high school?
1947.
And then you went from high school immediately to Pitt?
I went to the University of Texas for 1 year, and I didn't like it in college. It was just a lot of things that was difficult. So I finished the year and transferred to the University of Pittsburgh, and then I went 3 more years there and graduated in 51. Then I went to dental school for 4 years, and I graduated in 55. And the Air Force came to Pittsburgh, and they said, "We'll take the 6 highest students and nobody else." So I was one of the 6 highest. I was number 2 or 3, I don't remember exactly. So I signed up for the Air Force. I thought, I'm going to go and do my duty, and that way I'm not going to get drafted out when I finally begin a practice. I'm going to do what I need to do.
This is 55, 54?
No, it's 55.
55, okay.
So I'm signed up and committed to the Air Force. Then I get this love letter from the Air Force saying, "Dear George J. Schire, we're very sorry, but all of our slots for dentists are filled for this year, but we hope to be able to activate you a year from now." I get this letter. In the meantime, I'm not working. My dad's looking at me, he's put me through dental school. Did I really graduate? I have, so I make 3 trips to the Air Force headquarters in McLean Gardens in Washington, D.C., trying to get into the Air Force. I'm begging them to activate me. The first time I go, which was probably maybe August, they said, "No, we're filled up." And then I went a month or 2 later. They said they were filled up. And then I went a month or 2 later. And then finally they said, "Okay, we're going to activate you. And we're going to send you to Newfoundland." I said, "Where's Newfoundland?" "No, it's just right above Maine, So I drive home and I tell my dad, "I'm going to Newfoundland. It's right above Maine. You drive from Maine to Newfoundland." My dad said, "Are you sure?" I thought Newfoundland was an island. And, I got really mad at my dad then. I thought, he's always right. I think he's wrong. So I go running up to the library. The library's about a block away, a block and a half away. I run up to the library. I ask for a map book. I don't even know to ask for an atlas. I get from a map book, and my librarian said, "What are you looking for?" And I said, "I'm looking for a place called Newfoundland." So she helps me find it. She shows it to me. It's an island. Oh, I don't know anything about it, but that's not what I wanted. When I signed up for the Air Force, they said, "You can request the assignment you want." So I asked for Western Europe or continental United States. They give me Newfoundland. So I tell my mother Newfoundland. She says, "You don't want to go there. It's cold there." She said, "Let me call Eddie Joseph. Eddie knows Lyndon Johnson, and maybe Lyndon Johnson can get you out of that." And he probably could have. But I said, "Look, Mom, I'm not going to do that. I got this assignment, and I'm going to take it." So I did. I took that assignment. So meantime, I'm going to change course a little bit. I'm sitting around, and I know this oral surgeon. He's taken out my wisdom teeth after I had my teeth straightened. So I told him, I'm waiting around. I can't get into the Air Force for maybe a year. And he said, he said, "We got a situation at Wheeling Hospital." He said, "Maybe I can get you on at the staff up there." And I'm going to tell you how times have changed. Wheeling Hospital was the Catholic hospital. And they had an oral surgery resident in training. It was like a 2-year training program at that time in oral surgery. Well, he was a married man, but I think he began an affair with one of the nurses. And the nuns found out, and they fired them both. Well, you couldn't do that nowadays, but
Right.
when they fired him, maybe it was July or August, they couldn't get a replacement for him because the timing, the replacement timing would come in around June. So by this time, everyone was settled. So Dr. Messerly got me on the staff up there at no pay.
No pay.
At no pay. But every morning I'd go into the operating room with the oral surgeons and flirt with the nurses a little bit on the side. I'd go in and then, you know, in the afternoon I'd check the patients that had the oral surgery. And then at night I would write orders for the procedures that were going to be done the next morning, you know, on the oral surgery patients. Because each oral surgeon, there were about 4 of them, would tell me what orders they want. You know, prescribe this, prescribe that, you know, and then, you know, they'd get the patients ready for the surgery. So we do that in the morning, and then this was a small hospital and it wasn't very popular, so they couldn't get really good American residents in medicine. So the chief resident in surgery was a Chinese doctor, and then they had like 3 Filipinos who were residents in medicine, not in surgery. So I got to know them, and they were really pretty nice people. I can remember the names of them even now. So we used to play poker a little bit, you know, in their quarters, you know, in the afternoon. We'd play small-time poker. And then, or we would go to the racetrack. There was a racetrack in Wheeling. So we'd go to the racetrack in the afternoon. And one time, Dr. Messerly said to me, he said, this trainer came in and asked me for this medicine, and I got it for him. And he said, they're going to really juice up this horse, and you ought to bet on it. Well, you know, I didn't really have any money, but I think I borrowed, begged, stole, I don't know, maybe about $100, $150. That was a lot of money to me.
Sure.
I mean, you know, because I was getting 0 pay. So we bet on this horse. This horse came out of the gate like it had a rocket up its hind end. I mean, that horse was so far ahead, it was like it was running by itself. Whatever they gave this horse, I mean, it really got him going. So this horse is going around, and he is so far ahead, I think he could have walked the rest of the way. Well, all of a sudden, it was like he ran out of steam. I guess maybe, you know, the jolt they gave him wore off.
Right.
And then, you know, maybe he was going into a depressed state. But he was still running, but he wasn't getting anywhere. I mean, he slowed down, and all these other horses passed him. And I think he came in 2nd or 3rd, and it was just enough to wipe us all out. So that, I mean, that was the end of that. That was the only time I was in on what I consider a fixed race, and it didn't work out. So it shows you that honesty is the best policy.
Sure.
So finally, I got activated, and it was November the 29th, 1955. I went into service, and I had to report to I think Gunner Air Force Base in Alabama. That was the base where I had a 3-week indoctrination period where I went down there and I bought a uniform, you know, and they gave us instructions on how to be an officer, because I was going to be a 1st lieutenant, which was, you know, 2nd lieutenant, 1st lieutenant. So I wasn't the lowest officer, I was 1 step up. And, you know, they taught us what to do, how to salute, and how to behave, you know. I was a serious guy. So from there, we got a few days of leave, and then I had to, then I was sent to Maxwell Air Force Base in Brooklyn. So meantime, I knew a girl in Tuckahoe, New York, which is way above New York. I'm in Brooklyn.
Okay.
Okay, I'm in Brooklyn. She's in Tuckahoe. But anyway, I called her and asked her out, and I was there for a few days in this base, waiting to get my orders to go to Newfoundland. I had to wait for, you know, like to get assigned to a plane. You know what I mean? Travel orders. So it seemed like I took a a subway to another subway to a bus, and I finally got to her house. I don't know how I got there. And then we went down, and train, bus, train, and we went to the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center. And Jose Greco and his dance team was there. So we went for dinner. I'll never forget dinner. We have dinner. Well, first I go in. I have a uniform on because I don't have any civilian clothes. They put us behind a post. I mean, I couldn't see anything but the post. And the place wasn't that crowded, so I said, can't you give us a little better table? Yes, sir. I think he called me captain, lieutenant. So they moved us out. They gave us a halfway decent table. So we had dinner. We watched this floor show. A very, very nice floor show. We had really nice seats. So when it was over, our bill came. 2 people, dinner, dessert, coffee, whatever. It was $36. I'll never forget. And I felt good. I put 2 20s down. I gave him a $4 tip, which I thought that was a pretty decent tip, And I took her home and went back to my life, and I never saw her again after that until about 30 or 40 years later. But I mean, that was my one time when I went big time in New York. Well, then I get my orders. December 31st, I ship out to Newfoundland. I said, this is New Year's Eve. They said, it doesn't matter, you gotta go. I said, I don't want to go New Year's Eve. Look, Lieutenant, you better go. So I get on this plane at the McGuire Air Force Base, we fly up to St. John's, Newfoundland. We get there at night, maybe 5 or 6 o'clock at night, but it's winter time, December 31st. Pitch black. And we walked down off of the airplane. At that time, you didn't get the planes didn't connect with a chute to the terminal. I get down, I look around, and there's snow everywhere, piled up. 10, 12, 15 feet of snow. I think, my God, this is the end of the earth. I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen snow piled up like this. So, New Year's Eve, and I need to get a calendar for 1955 to see what day that was. But it seems to me that it might have been like a Thursday or a Friday for New Year's Eve, because I check in and they tell me, go to the VOQ, the Visitors Officers Quarter, and you can get a room. They'll put you up until you can get permanently assigned. And you couldn't get permanently assigned until the base opened. Everything is shut down for New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. So, I get a decent room, and then, where am I going to eat? So I walk down to the PX, and there's a counter there. I sit down at the counter. I don't know what to order. I order an omelet, I think. Ham and cheese omelets. I think I ate a dozen ham and cheese omelets in the next couple of days. So I order this omelet, and I eat it, and then I don't know anything. So I said, where's the officers club? And somebody says, up the hill. I walk up the hill. I go in there, and I don't know anybody, and I'm sort of bashful. I don't ask for any dentist. I think I went to the bar and had a drink or something. I'm not doing anything here. Everyone's having a good time. I'm all by myself. I don't know anybody. I walked back down to the VOQ and I went to bed. So the next day, I think, is New Year's Day. And base is closed again. So, I do the omelet at the PQ routine, back, and I'm walking around shopping at PX, what am I going to do? And I think the base is closed again the next day. Maybe the next day's Sunday. I don't know. So finally, after about 4 days, the base is open. So I report to the hospital where the dental clinic is. I report to my CO, and he welcomes me with open arms. He badly needs a dentist. they were getting a lot of orders on dentists that would never arrive there. I guess they'd get assigned there and then they'd pull strings and get out of the assignment. So we were always understaffed, but anyway, I then got assigned to the BOQ, the Bachelor's Officers Quarters. And they put me in with a bachelor physician who was an OBGYN.
You roomed with them?
Yeah, I roomed with him. And he was a crazy man. He'd come in 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning after delivering a baby, and he'd be cursing and swearing that these noofs, and I guess noofs were the Newfoundland girls, and the ambition of these young, uneducated Newfoundland girls was to get a yank and get to the United States. So a lot of them would get pregnant, and whether they were married or not, we would have to take care of them. A lot of them would get married. But a lot of them wouldn't come in for any prenatal care till almost the day of delivery. So Ron would have to deliver these women, many of whom he had never even seen.
Right.
So it wasn't easy. So he'd come in and he'd be cussing and swearing and be 30, 40 pounds overweight. Once the girl was married and had a yank, she didn't care. She would eat, and there, a lot of them believe you should gain a lot of weight. Well, at that time, the thinking in American medicine was a girl should be thin and gain no more than a maximum was 18 pounds, 2 pounds a month during pregnancy. Well, now the thinking is a woman should really gain more weight to have a healthier baby. But at that time, it wasn't that way. So, he'd be upset, and I'd be up all night with him. He'd be bouncing around the walls and everything like that. So I told the dental CO, and then he had me switched to a dentist who became one of my best friends, and Ron had a single room, which he should have had because his hours were just bizarre.
Yeah.
And I mean, it wasn't his fault. It's
Right.
just when he had to go and deliver a baby. Well, my roommate then was a big guy named Eli Talkov from Lynn, Massachusetts, Lynn. And, I was sort of moping around. He said, what the hell's the matter with you? Come on, he said, I'll get you a date. So he was dating a nurse, and she knew somebody. And next thing I know, he's got us a date, double date. So there was a troupe of stage players that came from England. They were called the London Players. And they would come to St. John's every year, and they would put on a new play about once every 2 weeks. Now that was not an easy thing to do because the same group of people had to learn the script from every play.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they were very, very professional. They were sharp. So we would go down to the play, and then we'd go out to the Officers Club for a drink. It wasn't expensive. So I mean, we had a little bit of a social life that way, and I got to know more and more people. And I told you the story about playing bridge. I thought I knew how to play bridge. My dad and uncle would play bridge every night they were members of the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic fraternal organization. My dad was a 4th degree knight, and I was a 4th degree knight too, but that's another story. So they would play rubber bridge, they'd play for 1/10 of a nickel or something. I mean, if you lost all night long, you'd lose 50 cents. So anyway, I thought I knew how to play bridge, and they had a bridge group that played in the Officers Club. And they would play once a week, once every 2 weeks, I don't know. So somebody said, they need a bridge player up there. Anybody? I said, oh, I know how to play bridge. So I sit down and they give me this woman, Holly Wilson, tough, smoking all during playing, Those days, it was fashionable to smoke. So I'm playing with Holly Wilson as my partner. We're playing duplicate bridge, not rubber bridge. Duplicate bridge, you play each team plays the same hand, and you move from table to table, and there's a little metal slot, and when you play your cards, you don't throw them out in the center, you play them in front of you, and then when you're done, you put them back in the slot. And so the players rotate from table to table, so each group, if you and I are partners, we will play the same hands as say Nettie and Mildred will play,
Okay.
or say Paula and MK would play. But in the scoring was such that whoever made the most points with that particular hand would get would win for the evening. It wasn't like if you bid 4 diamonds and made 4 diamonds, that was phenomenal. Because somebody might make 5 hearts, you see. So meantime, I'm going along here, you know, I don't know what I'm doing, you know, and I think, boy, I'm hot stuff. So we finished the evening, and I said to Holly, how do we do? She said to me, you are the worst goddamn bridge player I've ever seen. She says, now I'm going to tell you something. I want you up here, you know, every Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock, and we're going to teach you how to play this game. Okay. Her husband was a major, you know, and he was on TDY all the time. She was an alcoholic. I mean, she was a nice woman in her own way, you know. We got to be good. You get to be good friends. You know, in a base like Newfoundland, you're isolated. You can't leave the base. You know, there's no such thing as a 3-day pass because you would need orders to fly off the base. So we were all stuck. I mean, it was a bad assignment, but we were all in it. And it wasn't fashionable to complain because the guy next to you was suffering like you were suffering.
Right.
So anyway, we would go and begin playing bridge, and we began to learn how to play duplicate bridge. It's a much tougher game than rubber bridge. So Eli and I would fill in. And a lot of the men would, you know, the regular line officers, the flyers, you know, the pilots, the co-pilots, the flight engineers, they would go TDY a week or 2 or 3, and their wives would be going crazy at home all by themselves. So they'd come and want to play bridge, and they always needed partners. So Eli and I would fill in, and you know, we always had someone to play with. Then when the husbands would come back, they'd invite us over for dinner. You know what I mean? It just, you know, and it was a very congenial group. You know, we got to be very good friends with a lot of people. So Eli and I were dating a little bit downtown on a weekend, and then during the week we're playing bridge and things like that. And when they'd have tournaments, Eli and I would play together. And they would have tournaments that were sanctioned by the American Bridge Club Association or something, and you would get master points. And it takes so many master points to become a master player, maybe 500 points. Well, you'd win a tournament, you might get 1 point. You know, you might play bridge for 6 or 8 or 10 hours, you might get a point. That's how hard it was. And when they'd have the tournament, some of the people would come in from downtown and they were good bridge players. So I mean, it was a good level of bridge. I mean, there were a lot of things to do even though we were at an isolated base. So another story, there was a dentist from Denver named Dave Stone. I mixed his name up with Eli. Dave Stone was a guy who believed that God favored him, and he shouldn't be in Newfoundland. He shouldn't have to work on airmen with dirty mouths. He should only work on the upper crust. In the meantime, the rest of us, Eli and Jack Alfano and I and Dick Fedorowicz, I mean, we're taking the tough stuff. I mean, there's so much I could tell you about Newfoundland. I'll digress back to this. And anyway, we were the command headquarters for Newfoundland, Labrador, and Greenland. And at that time, the United States was afraid that Russia was going to come over the polar cap, either with bombers or with a missile, to attack the United States. So there was a DEW line, a distant early warning line from British Columbia to Newfoundland, all across Canada. We anchored the eastern end of it. And we would get these airmen who were going to be going out on the dew line. They would be in an isolated place in one room watching a television screen maybe 12 hours a day. They'd go crazy. I mean, the psychiatric rate there was unbelievable. These are young kids, 18, 19 years old. They'd get drafted and the Air Force would teach them maybe the little electronics or radar, whatever it was. And you know, they would go from basic training to the radio school to Newfoundland. And then they'd come in a dental clinic, would look in their mouth. It was unbelievable. Here was rotten teeth, broken teeth, abscessed teeth. And they're going to go out on a dew line by way of a helicopter. They're going to put them out there, and they're going to be there for 6 months. So, you know, we, in addition to just ordinary airmen, we would have these emergencies. So we would hospitalize these kids. And their CEO would come up and say, look, Doc, you got him for 1 day. I don't care what it is. I got to have him out there. I don't have anybody out there on that screen. I give you 1 day. So we would get these kids and do everything we could in 1 day to try to get him up, get their dental repair done, so they wouldn't have an emergency out there in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
in the middle of Canada's wasteland, in the middle of the winter. Sometimes you couldn't even get a helicopter to them. So, you know, this is, you know, we had this kind of stuff. So most of us are trying to do this work, you know. It wasn't like all day, every day, but when we'd get these kids, we'd do them. Well, Dave Stone didn't want to do that. So we had 3 generals at this base, 3 generals on one small base, 5,000 men, because we were a command headquarters. We had more full colonels than we had lieutenants on this base. It was a command base because of the importance of it. So General Barkus comes in to get his teeth cleaned. Dave Stone starts cleaning his teeth, and meantime he says how lousy the Air Force is and how lousy he's being treated. And he shouldn't have to do this dirty work, and he's too good of a dentist to be in Newfoundland, and he's working on General Barkus. And Barkus doesn't say a word. He gets up, thanks him, and leaves. He doesn't do anything to Dave Stone. He goes and writes up the dental commander. He writes him up for having personnel with a bad attitude. The dental CO is a man named Rex Hutchinson from Georgia. He had opened a dental practice in Georgia and failed. He didn't do well in his practice. He couldn't make a living, so he joined the Air Force. But they didn't let him go regular. He had to go reserve for whatever the reason. And in reserve, you don't have the protection of being a regular officer. So here, when Barkus writes him up, he gets passed over for promotion once. If he gets passed over a second time, he gets RIFT, reduction in force. He's out of the Air Force. He's got about 15 years in, and he needs at least 17 and a half to guarantee that retirement. Mm-hmm. Okay? You think he wasn't sweating bullets. This is my commanding officer comes to me with tears in his eyes. Tears in his eyes. He's my dental commander. He says, I don't know if I was a lieutenant or captain at that time. He says, Dr. Shai, you have to save me. I can't trust Stone. He's going to ruin my career. You have to take the field grade officers. He said, I can't have this happen. If I get passed over for promotion, I'm out. I don't even get my retirement. It's my CO with tears in his eyes. So I said, Colonel, he was a lieutenant colonel only. I said, Colonel, I'll do the best I can. You know, it's a lot of responsibility. He said, please, save me. So, along with the enlisted men, I'm working on majors, lieutenant colonels, and generals. So, next thing I know, I'm getting invited to the parties of line officers. Now, in all the military, there's a difference between a line officer and a medical officer. The line officers are the elite. They're the flyers. They run the base. The medical officers are there because they got to deliver babies or do the dentistry. You know what I mean? So I began getting invited to the parties of the line officers. So I began knowing a lot of them. So, you know, along with the girls in town and playing bridge and the line officers' parties, it really wasn't such a bad assignment. I mean, it's, you know, when you take what God sends you and do the best you can with it, it works out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, everyone was in the same position, a lousy assignment, you know. One time an airman came up to me, he says, "Doctor, I took my wife to the dentist downtown and he half killed her." He said, "We paid him, but I don't know what he did to her. Will you look at her?" I said, "I can't look at her during working hours. I'll look at her after the clinic closes." So he brought her in, and here was this young girl, you know. She had some stuff done in her mouth that was terrible. But see, we theoretically, we were not allowed to work on dependents because there were 5,000 airmen, you know, for like 6 dentists.
Right.
Plus the do-line people, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I did a little work on her and straightened it out. He wanted to pay me. I said, "Please, I don't want your money. It's not necessary." He went and bought me something. I had a little present. But I thought he was going to kiss me. I thought she was, you know what I mean? It's your wife. She's in pain.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the dentists downtown, they were not very good dentists, and they took advantage of the Americans. They could do anything to the Americans, you know, because the Americans had to go to them. And there weren't very many dentists down there, so they could just do anything. So the work they did on it wasn't very good.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a pretty good clinic. I mean, the work we did, I thought was pretty good.
So how long were you in Newfoundland?
23 months. I mean, right to the end. I mean, right to the last day. And then when they sent me to McGuire Air Force Base for separation, which took a day or two, and that was all.
So
I
that
was there
like,
the whole time.
That was like November of '57, I guess?
Yeah. It's a full 365 times 2 days that you're in, right to the end. But I mean, it was okay. I mean, when I got out, you know, I mean, we used to play a little poker. I don't know. You manage. You know what I mean? I'll tell you an interesting story. There was a dentist there was a surgeon, a general surgeon from Detroit, and he hated the Air Force. And when he got to Newfoundland, on the wall of his BOQ, he drew a thermometer and he marked it off with a day or a week for every time he was going to be up there. He was a pretty good surgeon, but you know, he hated the Air Force, he hated Newfoundland, and he finally inked it all in and finished, and he left. He went back home. He started a surgery practice, and he didn't do well for whatever the reason. And he tried to get back in the Air Force, and they refused him. And the Air Force is desperate for surgeons, but they refused him. They just said his attitude was terrible.
Yeah.
And I don't blame the Air Force.
That always follows you.
It follows you, and people like that aren't going to do good work.
Right.
Disgruntled people. So I mean, I think if you do your work as best you can, I mean, you're not the only one in a jam.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, we're all up there. So why should the man next to you be sympathetic to you? He's suffering too.
Right.
And the hardest was on the women, because the women, there wasn't much in the way of housing on the base. Only the highest officers got housing. The enlisted people and the lower people, they had to get housing in town in St. John's. And the housing, just wasn't much. And you know, that people would be living in cellars and stuff like that, and you'd have this long winter. I mean, it would start snowing in Newfoundland in, you know, maybe October, and it would snow through April or May. So, I mean, those women with 2 or 3 little kids, sick all the time,
Right.
you know, they'd go bananas. I mean, we as single officers living in a BOQ, I mean, we had it pretty nice. I even had a car up there. I mean, I came home one time and they shipped my dad's car up there.
Hmm.
So, I mean, we didn't have it too bad, but, you know, the lower ranks of married people, they really had it tough. If you were married and you went up there without your family, the tour was 18 months. But if you took your family, the tour was 36 months. So it was a tough choice for people as to which way they wanted to go. After, I tell you, life has a way of, life is a circle. Life is a circle. After I got out of the Air Force, I came down to Austin, and a couple years later, after I went to Columbia and specialized, I was practicing as an orthodontist. I got a call from Rex Hutchinson, my CO from the Air Force, and he said to me, I want to take the state board in Texas, and I wonder if you can help me. I said, Hutch, what can I do? I mean, you got to take that thing. It's a tough board. He said, well, don't you know anybody that you can put in a good word for me? Well, in Medical Park Tower at that time where I was officing, was the secretary of the state board, Dr. R.T. Weber Jr., a fine gentleman. I said, I can take you and introduce you to Dr. Weber, but from there you're on your own. I have no control over, you know, that. So I went to, he flew into Bergstrom because he could fly, you know, space available. Mm-hmm. And he flew in, and I met him at Bergstrom and took him to Dr. Weber's office and left him there. And I said, call me when you're done, I'll take you back to the base. So he spent some time with Dr. Weber, and then he left. I took him back to the base, and he took the state board and he failed it. I don't know why, but I mean, the last person in the world I thought I would ever see again was my CO from Newfoundland.
Right.
And yet he came back in my life, and then I don't know what happened to him after that. Mm. I could tell you stories. After Colonel Hutchinson rotated, we got a new CO. He was the second highest dental officer in the Air Force. And he had made a tactical mistake. He was in the Army. And when they split the Air Force from the Army, he chose the Air Force. And the man under him, who stayed with the Army, became the head of the Army Dental Corps. But he never became the head of the Air Force Dental Corps. He was always number 2 for whatever the reason. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like you not taking a certain assignment at Dell or not, and the choice you make turns out wrong for whatever the reason. He was a very high officer. He had more time and grade as a full colonel than the base commander, which is very unusual. And he had made the Bataan Death March. And he came to Newfoundland for 18 months because he didn't want to bring his wife for 36 months. So every night he'd be in the Rathskeller, which was like the cellar of the officers' club. It was a Rathskeller where they'd serve a little food and drink. Every night he'd be drinking. And he'd look around, and if he saw anybody that looked Oriental, he'd want to kill him. And he'd say, I'm going to kill that SOB. And Dick Fedorowicz and I would try to sit with him, and we'd stop him. Because, you know, it's like Patton. You can't hit an enlisted man, no matter what the reason is, you can't do it. And when we'd see he'd start drinking and he'd start to lose it, we'd say, come on, Colonel. And no, I said, come on, Colonel. So Dick and I would get him from arm to arm. We'd get him out the side door, take him down to BOQ, put him in his room and leave. The next day there wouldn't be a thing said about it. You know what I mean? We didn't say anything about it. We liked him.
Sure.
I mean, you know, if I went through the Bataan Death March, there's no telling how it'd be. But, you know, he was lonely. He didn't have his family there. But he really liked me. And interesting story. Dave Stone was pulling this routine. I'm not working on these people. I don't want, you know, if he saw an airman with a dirty mouth, he'd say, when you leave, don't make an appointment on my book again. You get on somebody else's book. So Alfano and Eli Talkov and I were getting all these bad mouths, and Dave Stone would get a clean mouth. He'd do a wee little filling, take about 2 minutes, then he'd sit down on a chair for 30 minutes. He'd have one patient every 30 minutes. He'd do one wee little filling and sit down. So I saw him in the, like in the storeroom, and I said, listen, Stone, and I cussed him out. I said, listen, you're going to take these patients with bad mouths, just like the rest of us. You're going to do your share. I'm going to beat the hell out of you, Stone. I said, I've had about enough of you. I'm not, you know, and if you want to do it right now, I'll do it now. We'll do it later. But you're not going to do this. You're not going to pull this stuff. You're going to take the rotation and the assignment that's given, just like the rest of us. Mm-hmm. I said, and you know, otherwise there's going to be blood around here. And I really meant it. I don't know whether I could have taken it. I was as angry as I was. I'm like my dad. I think I could have. Unbeknownst to me, the new colonel is standing in the doorway. The new colonel, his first day he hears this, he doesn't say a word. He smiles and walks out. Later on, he said to me, you did the right thing. I appreciate that. And he said, I'm going to keep on Stone. He's going to do his work like everybody else. He's not going to pull his foolishness. So we got the clinic sort of straightened out where the load wasn't on 1 or 2 people. Because, I mean, you know, we got 5,000 men to take care of. You know, this isn't a place for, you know, Hollywood stuff.
Right.
You know, Eli and I, we decide we want to go to Europe. We have a 3-week vacation. So we can fly space available on any flight that's going through Newfoundland to Europe. And you don't know which one you're going to get, because you can get a flight that may be going to Spain, you might get one going to Turkey, wherever there's a base where this particular plane is going. Well, right when we decide to take this vacation, the thing was under MATS, Military Air Transport System. It was MATS rotating the personnel from Europe. Every plane is full. There's full coming from Europe and full going over, replacing people. We can't get on the plane. But I see one of the pilots that I had gone to one of the parties, you know what I mean? I said the field grade pilots, and I told him our situation. He said, Doc, I'll take care of that. So we get on the next plane, it's going to Frankfurt, just where it was going. But there's no seats on it, the plane is full. But Eli and I are in the cockpit. And in the cockpit, there's 2 bunks, and there's like, you know, pilot, co-pilot, and you know, flight engineer at least. There's at least 3 people. Mm-hmm. So we're in the cockpit flying, and one of us at least has to be in the bunk all the time. There's not enough chairs. Right. So Eli and I fly to Europe, sort of taking it easy in a bunk bed, and we land at Frankfurt. Now, we go to the dental clinic at Frankfurt. There are so many dentists there that they only have to work 3 days a week, because there are not enough dental units and rooms for all of the dentists who have pulled strings and gotten stationed there. Meantime, in Newfoundland, we're going crazy. We can't even handle it. So it shows you that, you know, this was going on. Sure. People that knew a congressman, you know. So, I mean, that's the way it was.
It says a lot about you not calling
a
favor, you know.
I mean, I just felt like I didn't want somebody to come back 10, 20 years later and say, you pulled strings, you got out of that assignment. Mm-hmm. I just didn't want that.